good on our end. We'll all thank Dr. Risby in the chat as we can. And we'll take questions online to the chat, so you can post questions and we'll get them to Dr. Risby afterwards so we can move on with the agenda. You can also post questions through the WOVA app as well. Thank you, Dr. Risby.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So we'll transition to introducing Dr. Edwin Nichols, who will be our next speaker. I'll read his introduction and we'll give him a chance to set up with our team. So our next speaker is a Rose and Robe favorite, is Dr. Edwin Nichols. Dr. Edwin J. Nichols is a clinical industrial psychologist working in organization development. He is the director of the Nichols and Associates Incorporated, which is an applied behavioral science firm. The goal is to restructure organizations to achieve systemic congruence in process through cultural competence and leadership. He has provided these services to Fortune 500 corporations, foreign governments, national government agencies, and other organizations. He was educated at Assumption College, Windsor, Canada. Other universities I will not mention in Germany. He was trained in Germany as well, in Austria, where he received his Doctor of Philosophy in Psychology and Psychiatry. Dr. Nichols also served in our Army during the Korean War and has 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. And with that, we will welcome Dr. Edwin Nichols.
Hello.
We have you, Dr. Nichols.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here, and I want to get some correction on the time frame. What is my time frame?
We have you for an hour and 15 minutes till 1:45 Eastern time.
Okay, hour and 15 minutes. Okay, ready, get, set, go. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Risby for his fantastic introduction. I taught psychiatry at Meharry Medical College in the 60s, and he went to the National Institutes of Mental Health. I was there as the first Black to head a center in the late 60s, early 70s. So it's good to know that he is on the right path. I'm very proud of him and very glad to have the opportunity to have heard his presentation. And with that last name, Risby, we might be related. Who knows? I don't know, but we'll see. Okay. Well, what I've been asked to do today was to talk about the psychological ramifications on individuals in this period of COVID-19. And there are many possibilities. I've selected 4. And the 4 that I've selected are, I've selected one, which is fear, the concept of fear. What is the psychological ramification of fear on the individual during this period of COVID-19? In that structure of fear, there are 4 types of fear, or 4 sequences of fear that I want to talk about. The first is the fear of death itself. The second is the fear of loss. And the third is the fear of conflict. And the fourth is the fear of the future. The fear of conflict is pretty much the subject matter that Dr. Risby gave to you. It will become more obvious as we move through these things. Also, in this concept of fear, because we live in a society of institutional white racism, we have to understand that there is a separation that people see between us and the other. So us in this country is the concept of whiteness and white privilege. And the other are people of color, and in our situation, specifically African Americans. So when I talk about this process of fear, we're going to talk about it from 2 perspectives. From the people who consider themselves as the us of America, and the others that we constitute. So when this situation first hit, the fear of death, among the others, now you see, when the coronavirus hit, what was in the minds? Well, of course you're going to have large numbers of deaths among Blacks. Why? Because there's a high incidence of contracting the virus, astronomical numbers of deaths within that community. And why? Well, the other has diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, heart conditions, because of their lifestyle. Now, lifestyle connotes the idea that this is something you have chosen to carry out. And if we look at the conditions of the African-American community, it's demonstrated by Dr. Lisby. None of those were chosen, they were superimposed. So right away, you have a group of people who think about the African-American and people of color as the other. And the reason they have the problems that they have is because it's their lifestyle, something they have chosen to do. The high incidence of deaths in nursing homes of the elderly is because the other works there and brings the virus to work from their homes. So it's not assuming any responsibility of the hospital itself, but the reason their deaths are there is because the other has brought that into our midst. And COVID-19 will not attack us because the state says we are immune. So go back a couple years, number 45 made big statements that it was something simple, it would pass away, it was no big deal. And they believed it. So here's another issue. Why would people believe those things that are untrue? It's because they have been socialized. If you take a concept or an idea and you repeat it over and over and over and over and over and over again, it becomes for you reality. How have I forced myself to understand something from the other side of this whole situation? Right now, we're saying to people, you need to be immunized. People are saying, well, I'm different, I don't need to be. Then you see them in the hospital half dead. And for some of them, it's too late. But what is that conflict all about? Well, if you see yourself as the chosen one, these things won't affect you. If you listen to what I do as I told you, to make myself conscious of it, I force myself to listen to Fox News at least 3 times a week. Just sit and listen for a couple of hours, because I want to understand what is the socialization process that this group of people are constantly hearing when that's the only news they listen to. It imprints on them the concepts that we hear that are just untrue. But that's how they come to think that way. Now, no, the government can't force me to wear a mask. I have my rights, this is against my civil rights and blah, blah, blah. The government proclaims assurances, the us, that they're safe from COVID. Oh, it's not, it won't be you, it'll be them. Now, here's what happens when the stark reality that none are exempt from contracting and or dying from COVID-19. The terror of paralyzing fear grips the us. And that's the fear of death for them. It's like, why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't I know? And it happens and it's significant, but you still have that fringe element on the side that are constantly being socialized, that you don't need to be vaccinated. There are cultural competency issues we need to look at. Why were we not told that COVID-19 kills us? We are the good, we are the young. Now the emotional issue, cognitive dissonance. Why does one hear hospitalized patients saying, we didn't believe it would happen to us. The word pan from the Greek means all. So you think that all doesn't mean you? This is the cognitive dissonance that I thought and my reality is different. The belief system, I'm different from the other or those people. Now the goal in mental health work is to move the thought process beyond the misuse of dichotomous thinking, which forms isms and gives privilege. Also, it separates us from the other. Then there is no empathy, understanding, or even tolerance for the other. And that's what you see when you have people proclaiming that it is your fault, it is your lifestyle that caused you to be in that situation. Now, the second fear that we must concentrate on is the fear of loss. Statistically, there's a high correlation between mental health issues and unemployment. Currently, many never thought that they would lose their job. They too are seeking unemployment benefits and government handouts for their families and or their businesses. The greater societal danger is that their projection of blame, which is they, the other, took my job. They are unfair. They are un-American. Your past privilege is no longer a necessity. The other in the global marketplace has the newest technology, does the job better and faster, and the 1% who make investments all over the world are electing to choose people that do the task over those that just have whiteness. So you have a group of people who felt privilege, and now their jobs are gone. And the things that they always felt that they could do, have, are gone. Now, what kind of conditions are we developing in those people with their fear of loss? The us has exhausted their savings. They have no money to pay the rent or the mortgage, questioning themselves, will I lose my house, my apartment? Some with the potential of homelessness, and others go home to live with their parents. Can you imagine the horror of that? Now, I want you to be mindful of language, because right now you're being confronted with the terms of breastfeeding as opposed to chest feeding. What's that all about? Well, when something is not to your liking, you change it. Now, this other group, this us group, found themselves for the first time in their lives asking for free food to feed themselves and their children. And they're not talking about food stamps. They're not talking about any of those things that those people always use in head. So the language has to change their conception about themselves, because if you think all your life you've been pointing at those people and their food stamps, now you're on food stamps, what does that do to your psyche? So we have to change the language. We don't talk about food stamps anymore. We talk about food insecurity. The reason you're having the issues you have, the reason you're lining up to get free food is that you have food insecurity. Not that you're shiftless and lazy and don't know how to take care of your money and you need food stamps. So again, we have to be mindful of how language changes to accommodate the us. And that has never happened with the other. We are the ones that are expendable to these language changes. These are fine details, but listen very closely and see how they work. Food insecurity. Now, cultural competence. This is the new experience for us, sadly, a common experience for the other. The emotional issue, a loss of self-esteem, a loss in the belief of one's ability to make it happen. So the American rule is, you can make it happen. You just wish you can do it. No, that hasn't worked out too well for some people. The belief system, I've failed, it's my fault, there's something else I could have done. That's internalizing the guilt and the anger. Anger turned upon the self is depression. So you begin to see these phenomena in terms of how people are dealing with their anger and the direction in which they turn it. You want to be careful because it can be depression. The goal, relieve anxiety, reestablish a sense of self-worth, and go back now to the slides that you saw with Dr. Risby. He talks about the need for meditation, that's a possibility. He even instructs us in the concept as African Americans, prayer and prayer life has always been a very integral part to our survival. The most important thing is not to start self-medicating, and you want to watch people who are experiencing the loss, the fear of loss from suicidal ideation. Now, I want to combine the fear of death and the fear of loss as an experience of the other. We've seen how the us felt about it. Now, what about us? What about those people over there? Their family circumstances truly make the other, that makes them the other because of their lifestyle. Remember, quote unquote, when the extended families of the other live in small cramped quarters with limited space, their fears are more intense. Some members have pre-existing health conditions that make themselves vulnerable to die from the virus. Often one or more family members has been classified as essential workers. Now, in our society, the object is the highest value, axiologically speaking, for Western culture. So wealth and money are the essentials to the survival. That's why you have shifts in when you wear a mask and when you don't wear a mask and when your society is open. So because the greatest fear is the economy might collapse. So whatever is necessary to keep that going, you by law declare that this group of people are essential workers and they have to go to work or they'll be punished. Well, what are some of the jobs that they have? Do you remember the big situation that was talking about the meatpacking industry, and all these people walked out because they didn't have the proper conditions to keep them from getting COVID-19? Well, they forced them back. They said, well, we have some gown. They didn't have the gowns, space, or anything else. It's interesting that we never hear any statistics about how many of the people in the meatpacking industry contracted COVID or died. Isn't that interesting? Well, it isn't interesting because whatever happened to them, they were essential workers for the economy. The other essential worker from the family might work in the hospital and she works in housekeeping. Well, she has to go to work because that's her job. She doesn't go, she loses her job. But when she gets there, what about PPE? Personal protective equipment. Do they have it? No, you had people wearing garbage bags and all kinds of things trying to protect themselves from the virus. But nobody put a major emphasis on that because they were essential workers. They had to work, but, well, it's their lifestyle that causes them these issues and problems. Of course, with COVID-19, the other experiences the highest mortality and morbidity. Those people, the other, have come to the realization just how little their lives matter compared to the importance of the national economy and the 1%. An issue around cultural competence. In the system, they are units of production, but not in their own value system. When you're doing, I work in industry quite often. So when we talk about a project that has to be done, how many hours is it going to take and so forth, and it boils down to, well, how many units of production will we need? Units of production is an object, but that object means how many people we need to accomplish the task. We don't even use the word, how many people. We redefine them as units of production. The emotional issue, I will lose my job, my health, my life, I might cause the death of someone else in my family. These are the terrible situations in which people that both individuals in the family with relatives coming to stay with them because they lost their place, somebody sleeping on the couch, two people sleeping in the same space, and so on. Those are all the realities of the other. That's the African American, that's the Hispanic, and that's the brown and black communities of our society. Not because it's a lifestyle, it's because they won't rent to you in other areas. That's the issue you have to be mindful of. Now, this is the sad part. This is the part that psychiatry, psychology, and social workers have to listen to hear. This group of people begin to see their condition as their existentialistic reality, from which there is no exit. If you've never read Jean-Paul Sartre's play, No Exit, you should read it. Because this talks about a situation where you have people that are essential. They have to go be exposed to the virus. They can die from it, or they can bring it back and give it to grandmother who's living there, and she dies. So that constant uneasiness, and there's no way out. That's the existentialistic reality, and that's the most frustrating thing with which we have to cope. And that's the point at which mental health can become mental illness. Must be vigilant about that. Now, the next fear is the fear of conflict. All right, this is for both the us and the other. Self-destructive behavior, anger at the self for neglecting the family, for the job, inability to provide for the family. This is when people lose their job or have to come home and live in the same house with no job, no future, and concern. They turn the anger upon themselves, which is depression, or sometimes they self-medicate to relieve the stress. That's when they use alcohol and drugs. In Ohio, it's methamphetamines. They take, now here's something that's new that you may not know about. But some people overdose on drugs and die. But now the insurance companies are beginning to come to the realization that some of the overdoses are not accidental, but planned. And the reason is insurance companies will pay out for an overdose and the person dies. So if I want insurance money for my family and I feel I can't provide, I simply take an overdose and they'll get an insurance policy on my life. This is something new that's occurring that needs to be looked into. Okay? Now, there are other forms of coping. One is the addiction to internet. Hours and hours spent on the internet. What are they doing? Gaming. Some are doing gaming. Some are gambling. And now here's another one that you hear a lot about in marriage counseling, which is partners are watching pornography. And young priests are hearing this increasingly in the confessionals about pornography. It's become almost an epidemic in and of itself. So one has to ask, why pornography? What is the intent of pornographic vision? What is going on in the mind of the individual when they're seeing these? What are they hoping to accomplish? What goals and objectives are there? So when you analyze it, you have to think in terms of why pornography. But that's just another form of sort of like a self-medication, if you will. When these things happen, the quality of life narrows right down to almost nothing, because you don't have to be interacting with anyone if you're gambling, if you're watching pornography, or if you're gaming. You're just involved with yourself and the task. And so your ability to interact with others contracts. Be mindful that some people in these crowded situations have suicidal ideation, and some may even attempt to do suicide through an overdose or some other method. In terms of cultural competence, the realization that the axiology is of different ethnic groups responds differently to conflict. The emotional issue, behaviors border on neurotic and potentially psychotic breaks. That's what that mix of stirring pot, everyone living in this same small space. Belief system, there's no hope, nothing to live for, and the feeling of being so isolated. The goal, closely monitor potential hospitalization, medication, and suicide watch for those who are in the fear of conflict, turmoil, and confusion within the household. Now, the last of the four aspects of fear that I want to discuss with you is the fear of the future. Again, I'm going back to, I was trained as an analyst in Austria and Germany. So I've done my years of individual psychotherapy. I've got my badge that says you've done enough years. So now I'm working in industry. So this is an aspect of what's going on in terms of industry for the 21st century. The fear of the future, is my job still there? Will there be a job for me? Many of the service industry jobs were forced to close because they were without income for an extended period of time. Thus, they could no longer exist. Primary government efforts are to restore the national treasury, national economy. However, the workforce of 2020 has changed. Globalization has forced us to adapt a new organizational structure to compete, which is horizontal and flat. All right. The structure before, in organizational structure, was vertical and hierarchical. So as your friend moved up, he would move you up. As he made more, he would make sure you made more. And that was it. And people were sort of in silos, moving up in an organization. Well, silos are so isolated in a company, one department from another, there's no accountability. There's no reality in terms of how are they intermeshing to make the product successful. One of the things happens is there's a report due. And in my silo, I say, well, I've done my part because I sent my report out the silo. But when it leaves the silo, where is it? Where's it going? It's floating in the void. Hopefully it will float to where it's supposed to go. It may not. Other people's, they didn't do their report, or other people's reports are still out floating in the void. Well, industry has said this is dysfunctional. We have to do something different. And so they moved from this vertical hierarchical organizational structure and silos to just break down a job, put a group of people on a team, they accomplish the task, and the team is over, breaks up, and the people on that team look for a new project and a new team to be a member of. So it's a constant turnover in terms of personnel. And there's a matrix in the organization. And when your team has finished its product, you are back into the matrix floating around trying to figure out where can I get a job on the new project on a new team. That's completely different from the security that used to be when my boss moves up, I move up. That's a very important change. Now, team membership is the unit of production. People used to say, well, I did my part. Well, I did my part is not going to get it. It's was your team successful in producing the product. If the team is not successful, you may have done your part, but the team is fired or the team loses its position. Now, for people who have always left high school and went into the factory and were able to earn enough money to buy a home, a car, and be classified as middle class. Now, the rules have changed. And there's a whole new fear about what is going to happen to me in the future. So let's look to see. When the steel mills closed, Bethlehem Steel, US Steel, when all of the industries from in the late 70s, early 80s, from Pennsylvania through Ohio, lower Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, when all those industries closed, they closed so long ago that those structures have rusted, and we call that whole area the Rust Belt. Now, some told them, move to where the jobs are. But who's going to buy your house when there's no job around there? How are you going to relocate? So the government sent in programs and said, we're going to train you. This is what the president is talking about now. We're going to give you jobs for the 21st century. Well, the people that went there, primarily whites that had lost their jobs, went for a week. Some didn't even stay a whole week at the training that was being offered by the government. They didn't like it. It wasn't good. Oh, they had all kinds of excuses, and they didn't take part in it. Well, why? They're all high school graduates, and this is all developed as curricula on a high school graduation of human, which when you look at the transcripts, the highest form of math they had was general math in the 9th grade. No algebra, no geometry, no trig, no upper math, no upper skills. So what is their fear now? They're 50, 55 years of age. They've been getting by. But now with the dawn of this new 21st century and the competition with China, the globalization, what on earth are they going to do? Many of them feel they don't have the intellectual capacity to cope with the training and the skills. But what I'm suggesting is training has to be a training that is understood by your ethnic group. That's called epistemology. We know things differently. Different groups of people know things differently. What works for one will not work for the other. And I'll demonstrate that because I have enough time when I begin to look at the philosophical aspects of cultural difference with you. The other part of this is, at my age, will I be able to keep up? Because there's constant change and rapid pace of technological changes. And it requires higher academic skills. So if you are a young person today, a high school diploma won't do it. You need a college degree. Now, if you can't afford a college degree, or if you feel that you really can't do the work, go to a community college and get a certificate. What they're doing now in community colleges, that's why they want to make community colleges free like high school, is you can take a certificate course of 3 months that whatever organizations or factories are in your immediate area, you will have a specific skill that you are certified in, that you can go into this industry and work in that specific skill. Programming can be one of them. Any number of things can be a part of that. Sometimes it's repair. People that know things about computers don't always sit and work on a computer. What they may do is they may work for the transportation board in a city. And you know the boxes that you put your money in, and you flash your card to pay when you enter a bus or a streetcar? Well, those boxes have computers. Those computers get out of whack. And people who understand how to repair them have a job, pretty much a permanent job. Now, that doesn't require a full bachelor's degree. It doesn't require an associate degree. It requires a training course with certification. So begin to look for those courses that give certification. If you don't have enough money to go to college, if you don't feel that you can, these are potential jobs for the 21st century. The other part that we have to be mindful of is that the 21st century belongs to China. And it doesn't matter how much we complain and yell and scream about China. China's going on with their agenda. And, yes? Hello? China is moving on with their agenda. That's the reality. In order to compete, we have to be competitive because we can't shut them out. It used to be that we could knock their money, lock up their money, we could do all kinds of things. But they're far beyond what we can do that way, other than go to all-out war practically. But what we need to do is to be mindful that the future, we don't need to be fearful of the future, we need to be prepared for the future. And as African Americans, males, females, mothers, children, what have you, we need to think in terms of what job skills are necessary for me to have a job in the 21st century. When my skill set is old, what do I have to do at what junior college or community college do I have to go and take another certification? So I will have the skill set for that new level as the pace of the industrialization moves, beyond industrialization. When this whole idea moves rapidly, we'll be able to cope. Now, we've gone to as far as we can go with computers, but we're going to utilize them now in a different way. So now that we have DNA sequencing and so forth, people are going to begin to wonder, how easy is it to get rid of, like, sickle cell? There are always trials on the sickle cell anemia, okay? Well, there's going to be more work done in that, and that's going to require laboratory technicians. Well, it doesn't require that you have some special training other than a certificate, in some cases an associate degree, and then you have a permanent and good job as that field moves. So what I'm suggesting to us, to all of you, is there's no need to have the fear of loss in terms of the 21st century, will I have a job? It's the idea of where to go and get the training and the certification to assure that I will have a job in the 21st century. Now what I would like to do, and I've been asked to do this, I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'll talk about one aspect of the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, and I have to share the screen. And here. Let's see. Okay, there we are. Share. All right. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this because we've gone through this before, but I'm going to go, there's some major things that I want to talk about. And I want to talk about axiology. Axiology is the study of values. When we work with people who are ethnically different, they have each person has each ethnic group has its own essence of ethnic difference. That is, the very core of you is different. Now with epigenetics and so on, we realize that trauma and other things from slavery and earlier are still carried with us. That's this post-traumatic slavery syndrome. And other things that we know about trauma that we carry from one generation to another. Well, if we carry trauma, we also carry traits that were traits for survival and thriving from our country, a place of origin. When you go to Europe, you get there as the people migrate into Europe is at the end of the last ice age. They're the youngest of any ethnic group. Everybody else is already established thousands of years before you start to get Europeans, because Europe was covered with glaciers and you couldn't get to Germany and Austria and Switzerland, Finland, and all those places because it was all glacier. And as the glaciers melted away, people were able to migrate in those areas. And what you found was that the highest value lies in the object or the acquisition of the object, because the object meant your survival. Okay? And let's examine and see a few other things here. In terms of the crop season, In North Central Europe, you can't grow anything for 9 months. You can't plant seeds and grow a plant and have it harvested in the month of September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. Now, some of you want to argue with May. Well, okay. In May, the ground in Minnesota is still what? Frozen. The top border of Minnesota and Canada is the same latitude as the lowest border of Germany to Switzerland. So get an idea. If the ground in Minnesota is still frozen, what do you think about the other parts of Europe? So they only have 3 months. Now, people only have 3 months. What personality characteristics do you develop out of those 3 months? So let's begin to see what I can see here. Okay. All right, everyone see this? All right. The highest value lies in the object or the acquisition of the object, member to object. You already said their growing season is 3 months. Well, as Europeans, if you don't get everything done in 3 months, you face death with no second chances. All right. What characteristics does a group of people have to develop in order to do everything in 3 months, knowing that if they don't, they're going to all die? What are some of the characteristics? Well, one of the characteristics is they have to learn how to count and measure. How long is a month? Well, women do it with their gestation of 28 days, of their menses, 28 days. So women knew how to count and measure with the gestation period and the menses period centuries before men could grasp the concept. So this gives women one mark that they have that men don't have, math skills. And they can tell you that in 3 months you can plant, okay? Because they can count and measure. What other characteristics, if this is the week to plow and you say, I don't feel like plowing this week, do you have that luxury? Because if the seeds don't grow on the ground this week, they won't come to fruition and you will start to what? Death. So what other characteristics do people have? That they're a little sick, they're just returning from, recovering from the flu. The flu would have killed you in those days, generally, but the bad cold even would have done it. But they're just recovering, they don't feel too strong. Do they have the luxury of saying, I'm not going to plow, I'm not going to work in the fields? No, because if they don't, they end up what? Dead. Now, when you look at these characteristics and look at that person with that early imprint in survival and thriving 20, 21 centuries ago, what characteristics will they bring forth in their genes today about the fear of surviving and thriving? They are going to bring timeliness. Have you ever heard that you have to start this job at 8 o'clock and you are finished at B? Well, what do they say when you come late? Why are you late? What do they do to your pay? They dock your pay. That means they take some of the object from you. Now, some think, well, there's an A prime. If I didn't get here at 8 o'clock, I can start at A prime. And your thought process is, if I start at A prime, I can end at B prime. But in this culture, if you didn't complete everything by the end of B, the end of the growing season, you were dead. So then what do we see in the workplace today when we work with people that have this way of thinking? Your boss says, I want the deliverable, which is philosophically the object. By the end of the growing season, close of business today or the close of business tomorrow. And if you don't do it, you have missed the deadline. And there's punishment for missing the deadline. Now, we need to see that people see object as a very important factor in European culture. If object and storing and saving the object isn't important, how do you explain the phenomena of toilet paper. Remember when people were buying tons and tons of toilet paper? What was that all about? The fear is that you would run out and not have enough. And what is that? That's the object of acquisition. Because we couldn't count and measure how long the plague would last and how much toilet paper we would need. So buy all that you can and store it and save it. Here's another phenomenon. I just received a pamphlet, which is a Catholic periodical. And this man he says, an understanding of alcoholism. So I started to read it. But here's what is interesting to me. This is a religious man who wrote this. He says, what would it be like to have an active volcano 100 yards from your home? This is the part I want you to analyze. You never knew when the volcano would erupt and destroy everything you own. Then he says, and everyone you love. Which one did he say first? The ones you love or everything you own? He said everything that you own. So what is his axiology? The highest values in the what? Yeah. Now let's look at our own axiology as African Americans. Latins, we all share the same. And also Afro-Arabs. Our highest value lies in the relationship. This is what has kept us surviving. This is the most important dependent variable in how we interact, how you do your work in the agency, how you talk to people, how you talk to husbands who come in and want information about caring for the new baby or caring for their wife who is pregnant, caring these different kinds of things that you'll be responsible for in your work. Or how, as a husband, do I do the breast? Do I do the feeding? The breast milk? How? They're asking all kinds of information. But the most important thing is that we have to remember that in the African American community, the highest value lies in the relationship. That's the highest value. And it says, I expect you to treat me as an equal. Now you can outrank me and I'll show you deference because you outrank me. But I insist that you treat me as an equal. Because to do differently would be to treat me with disrespect. And that destroys the relationship. That's the most important thing I can tell you about any work that you do in the African American community specifically, and also with the Hispanic Black communities. People insist in their mind on being treated with respect. They'll listen to whatever you have to say, they'll show you deference in whatever position you hold. But they expect you to treat them with respect, because if you treat people less than equal, you have treated them with disrespect. What was one of the most important songs in the last century? Aretha Franklin. What did she sing? What did she make so popular? RS1. It's a crucial part of our whole being. Now, when Dr. Risby talked about the difference in doing psychotherapy with Blacks, he said, you know, you're trained in school one way, but sometimes you have to put that off somewhere and you have to do something different. Well, he will tell you that in the literature, there's a long discussion about the fact that African American men do not stay in therapy. They come for one session or two sessions and then they drop out. They don't come back to therapy. And of course, there's a whole litany of why they didn't do it. But if you go back to the idea of respect, see, now, when you take the test, this is not the answer. You give the answer that you're supposed to give. But this is the reality of working with this population. When you are doing training for psychotherapy, if the patient asks you a question, you are to reflect the question. Now, I have Mr. X here, and I have been asking him all questions about when he was born, all his sex life, everything. I've asked all these questions. And he looks at me and says, Dr. Nichols, are you married? Now, training says, the proper response, that's a very interesting question. Why did you ask? But then you see, that's a put off to the Black community. So how do you handle it? Do I go into great details? I'm married. I told, no, I just have a picture on my desk. I said, there's my wife and kids. Yeah, I'm married. Yeah, that's my wife and kids. I don't have to take it any further. But I have shown him a degree of what? Respect, that I recognize that he has something to bring to this conversation. I'm not the only one here in this room. So when you hear that in order to do psychotherapy with African Americans, there's certain details in European training that you have to obfuscate and leave because you'll have no success. That takes time to learn. You can't miss it, but on the test, know what the answer is, but other than the test, you don't have to keep the population there. All right, if the highest value is in the relationship, then what does that say? It says that we have to have a level of trust to work together. Now, in the context of males and females, okay, so males and females. In Western culture, in the Western culture, males are superior to the female. She is subordinate. According to European law, the European women are the property of their husbands. According to European law, the woman's dowry becomes the husband's property because she's his property. If she needs discipline, he can take a stick and correct her by giving her blows with the stick. Now you can see some cognitive dissonance about taking a stick and beating a Black woman. You might not survive the hot grits facial that she'll give you in the middle of the night. What I'm sharing with you is that there are differences, and in the work that you are doing, you must be aware that there are differences. The people with whom you work, males and females, see themselves as equal. Now, when you ask that, and you say to a Black woman, if your husband is not there, something happens to him, like in slavery when he was sold someplace else. Can you get your own food? Well, in Africa, that's where we all start. Well, of course she can get her own food. And even during slavery, they went out and got poke salad and other things, which was to get their own food. Because the biggest crime was stealing food. Because people were hungry, they didn't have enough food to eat. If you say to this Black woman, well, if your husband were angry, told you to get out, they take families to build themselves a shelter. How many times Black women are told to get out, or they tell the husband to get out, they go out and they make it anyway. They find a way. That's because that's the process of thinking within the community. And I don't know too many Black men going to take a stick and beat a woman and lay down and go to sleep, expecting to get up the same way he laid down to go to sleep. So we are different. We have axiological differences that we need to be cognizant of. I'm going to move now quickly because I want you to look at epistemology and a couple of other things. Epistemology is how we know things. So in the work that you're doing, you have to present documents, papers, and brochures that address the African American population. So what I'm going to do is to go over here and talk about it from the perspective. Down. Let's see. Here's the Asian. Highest value lies in the cohesiveness of the group. Yin and Yang is the division of work. So here's another culture that has men doing one task of things and women doing another. but they see themselves as equal because yin and yang are two forces, male and female forces, but they're in balance and harmony. So you do what you're supposed to do, I do what I'm supposed to do, and we survive. That's the way of thinking. Now let's talk about how that comes into being. The highest value in Asian culture this has done something dumb. No. Okay. Well, let's use this. We can go here. Right. The highest value lies in the cohesiveness of the group. What does that mean? It means that people work together in order to accomplish a goal and objective. That's what it means. So what I want to do now is I want to go through a couple of other things here. Still with you. Let's see. If group cohesiveness is the highest value in Asian culture, how, you see, when I was talking about people know differently, how can you teach Chinese using Western epistemology, count and measure parts of the whole? How can you teach it? Can't. Let's look to see how Chinese see themselves. If the highest value is in cohesiveness of the group, what do we understand groupness to be? Well, this is the Chinese word for group. Etymologically, it's two words. This is king, or region. This is sheep, or conformity. So if you are conformist within the hierarchy, you keep your group cohesive. How do you make decisions? Well, in Western culture, we majority rule. That won't keep a group cohesive because you got one person that said what everybody else is supposed to do. So what do? They come to a consensus. Well, how do you write consensus? In traditional Chinese. What do we have here if you look at the etymology of the words? This word is heart. And the word above it, when written as a single word by itself, is voice. So in order to come to consensus, your heart and your voice have to say the same thing. How many times have we said something with our voice we didn't mean with our heart? Are you going to help me with the project? Call me. Are you coming to my workshop? I'm going to try as hard as I possibly can to get there. Well, those are things said with the voice and not with the heart in Chinese, so we don't play that. So when you say something with your voice and you mean it with your heart, this is a new Chinese word. This is the Chinese word for intent. So if I know how you think and feel, I know your intent. And if we all have the same intent, to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, produce 1,500 widgets, we can then come together. That's how they write unity, or come together, and speak through one mouth. Not a lot of mouths saying a lot of things, just speak out of one mouth, and then we can act as a conformist within the hierarchy. Now let's stop for a moment. With this epistemological model, who scores highest on standardized tests in the United States? Asians. Well, why is that? Because their study habits, and because the only way you can read a Chinese character is you cannot leave out a stroke or add a stroke. This is one Chinese word. This is a second word. This is today, and this is an order. Now, If you forget which one is today and which one is ordered, you're in serious trouble. So just that one stroke makes a difference. And if you go into Chinese characters, you see it all the time. So how then do they have the highest scores? Well, in our society, if you took an examination, you got 19 possible answers, you got 17 correct, most of us would feel okay. But the Chinese father would not be satisfied with that. He wants to know, why don't you have 19 over 19? Because if you don't have everything, you have nothing. So let me demonstrate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Where are the other two? You have absolutely nothing without these other two, or without these other two, or without these other two. Without any of those other two, you have absolutely nothing. You can't guess. There's no stem. There's no prefix, no suffix. There's nothing here. Either you see the whole character and know it, or you don't know it. And in order to go to college, you need 2,500 characters. So are you looking and understanding what the competition is with China, and what we have to do with our children in school, and how we have to give our children a head start? And we all know from the literature that breast milk and breastfeeding gives us a psychologically stable and advanced intellectual child. So that's my contribution. If we are going to be competitive in the global society, we have to begin to make sure that our children have a head start. And a head start is not formula. If you can't do differently than formula is what you have to do. But if you can breastfeed from the beginning of the first clear liquid coming out of the breast to a year later when you stop breastfeeding, or whenever you stop breastfeeding, the nutrition that the child receives, the stuff that will help to grow the brain and all the other things is there. Nothing else gives it, that's it. And the other part of it is the emotional security the child has being held and breastfed. That closeness of the rhythm of the mother's heart and the child's heart, that's a sense of security. And when you are secure, you can go forth into the world and meet the challenges, specifically the work challenges of globalization in the 21st century. Thank you. I'll answer and entertain questions if you have them. Questions?
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. We'll, so you can ask questions again through the chat, or if someone is brave enough to unmute themselves, please feel free to ask.
There's one other thing I'd like to share here. Let me just get out of this, and I want to share something with you here. Okay. As African Americans, we make declarative statements that talk about our existentialistic reality, what we feel. In order to better understand the commotion of the press, media, and of some whites is about the statement, Black Lives Matter, we must understand the process of a specific system of logic. When we say Black Lives Matter, that's our existentialistic reality. Now, traditionally, Western civilization uses dichotomous logic to reason to an answer. So it's either yes or no, a plus or minus, an A or B, 0, but that's binary. But what people do is they change dichotomous logic to dichotomous isms. They form an ism. So let's just see what happens there in the forming of an ism. Let's take this declarative statement, Black Lives Matter. From the ear of whites who use dichotomous logic, they say, if Black Lives Matter, then you are saying that white lives do not matter. You say, no, 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 I didn't say that. I'm simply making a declarative statement. Black lives matter. But you meant that white lives don't matter. Now, this is their problem, not ours. But what do we do to accommodate this? We take the defensiveness of whites and we change our declarative statement and permit them to making it an inclusive statement. Oh, well, then yellow lives matter, and brown lives matter, and red lives matter, and white lives matter, and black lives matter. Now, what has that done with that inclusiveness? It has taken away the value of the statement to the Black population. Years ago, we said Black is beautiful. James Brown said, I'm Black and I'm beautiful and I'm wonderful, glorious, everything. But what has happened to that? And when that first came out, are you saying that white is ugly? No, I didn't say that. Well, you meant it. No, I didn't mean it. So then we had to dilute a very powerful understanding for our children to accept the reality that Black is beautiful. Not like the little doll, the white doll, the black doll, the Black children picking the white doll. No, for the first time you could see yourself as a little Black girl and say, I am beautiful. But then you get the system which maintains the status quo to intercede in a declarative statement, neutralize it down to where it is no longer effective or meaningful for your culture. So when you come up with a declarative statement, don't let it be watered down with these t-shirts with everything else on it. Keep it as Black lives matter. Black is beautiful. It's a declarative statement. And don't let others, with their misuse of dichotomous logic, try to change things. Okay, I've gone my time limit, and if there's anything that's pressing, I'll be glad to answer it. Otherwise, I thank you for having had the opportunity to share concepts and ideas with you.
And we do have time for questions.
I can't hear.
We do have time for questions, Dr. Nichols, so we'll pull something.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'll listen for the question. Or is there something, 70 things in the chat room? Go there.
Dr. Nichols, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
This is Calvin Williams, reaching our brothers everywhere. When you talked about in the Chinese, I'm probably going to make sure I use the right term here, their axiology, I believe is what you were talking about.
Yes.
The heart and the voice must be congruent.
Yes.
Right. And then did I understand you to say that that congruence then sets up something that's of a higher value, which is intent?
Yes. And when they're writing the word intent, it requires those two characters.
Oh, I see.
The character for voice and the character for heart. And you put those two characters together, voice and heart, and that's the way you write the Chinese word intent. So you understand, what is your intent? Well, your intent is something that you've said vocally with your voice, but you've also meant it with your heart. Then I know your intent. Very often we say something with our voice we don't mean with our heart at all. And you're never clear about what is our intention.
Mm-hmm. And so just a quick follow-up. So what is the potential or actual damage from operating where in spaces where your voice and your heart are not congruent?
That's cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
But now let's talk about that for a moment, because sometimes you have to work where you don't really want to be there, or people don't make you feel comfortable there. But you know, I told you about all these white institutions. I was the first, all the craziness. My survival technique for working in hostile environments is that when I go to work, I act and behave white. I use their axiology, highest value lying in the object. I use their epistemology. Any paper that comes across my desk that has to be approved or anything I send out is something you can count and measure, parts to the whole, presented in a linear sequential pattern. And I use dichotomous logic. Either the report was in on time or it was not. If your report was not in on time, you're punished. So I live and work in that environment and that mindset. Now, when I leave and come home, I go back to my own epistemology of member to member. I don't even think about the office anymore. So that has been my survival in working in places where I was the Black, the first Black, or the only Black. That is that because when I tried to work with my model, I got into trouble. If we have enough seconds, I can share that with you. I was at the National Institute of Mental Health, and they put me into a center, which was a developmental center, cognitive development. And around the room, there were like some 10 guys and some women who were Ph.D s in all these different areas of cognition. And I went around the room and said, well, how many years have you spent in the field? And how many years of experience do you have? 30 years, 20 years, 25 years, all these things. I added them all up on the board. We had almost 2 centuries of knowledge. I said, with 2 centuries of knowledge, we should be able to solve any problem that comes up to be solved or answered by this center. I said, and I expect each of you to be able, when something comes up, to share the knowledge among you and come up with an answer so that it represents the department and the right answer. I will spend my time trying to get more money, more faculty, more everything else for us, and all the other things that you say you need. That's where I'm going to spend my time. Well, I said, I need from you a procedure so I can see what kind of work you're doing. What are you doing? Well, when I got that back, these white guys wrote absolute crap. I guess they thought I didn't know what I was doing. I guess they thought all kinds of things, because it was, how are you going to talk about the most current research and you use a book? It takes years before a book is published. The current information right there in the National Institute of Mental Health, we have it right there in research work. Take the research, you do the research, it takes you a year to get the book published. They're quoting books and things like that. I was so angry, and I recognized what they were doing. They were treating me with what? Disrespect. And so what I did is I called them in. And I went into my act, which is to act just like a white boss. Count, measure parts of the whole. I went through their report with a red pencil. I corrected grammar, spelling, punctuation. I went through the bibliography and said, this is obsolete, this has changed. So-and-so wrote this 20 years ago. Who has a contradicting thought to this in most current literature? I just played monster, okay? And I said, I want this corrected, and I want back on my desk by close of business in 2 days. Then I gave it to them. I said, of course, you realize this report is going into your permanent file, which is indicative of the quality of work that you produce. Well, now, they didn't like me. They did what I said when I told them to do it. It was a hostile environment. Some people can't deal with hostility. But that's how I survived. But when I came home, I was with my friends and my family, and I let all that go. Some can't cope with that. Some people break down under that stress. If it's too stressful for you, get out, go someplace else if you can. But as Blacks, there are many times there's no other place for us to go. We have to survive in that environment. And that's been my survival technique.
This is my last piece. Is that analogous to code switching?
Code switching is more language, yes, but it is, you can call it code switching, yes. I'm hi, how are you? I'm Ed Nichols, good to meet you. Or on the job, how do you do? I'm Dr. Nichols, how may I help you? You see how I've gone? Even the tonal quality is gone, it's changed.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Others?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nichols. You brought us in right on time for break. I see the chat. Everyone has truly appreciated the knowledge you have shared with us today. So we thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. As usual, you have left us with more food for thought. Moving forward, we have a 10-minute break. Haley, I'm not sure if we have a clock that you want to share.
Okay, I'm saying thank you very much. I've enjoyed it as always. And if questions come up and I need to answer them, just text me and I'll do it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.